Welcome back to the Daily Drum on WHUR and Sirius XM Channel 141. This is the Insight segment. I'm Harold Fisher. The numbers are in, and they are hard to ignore. A new Wallet Hub study finds the racial wealth gap in America is still deeply entrenched, and DC ranks worst in the nation. In a city known for influence, affluence, and opportunity, figures show Black families hold dramatically less wealth than their white counterparts. How did the nation's capital become ground zero for economic inequality? And what does this mean for the people living it every day? Well, tonight we break down the data, the drivers, and the consequences. My guests are Chip Lupo, writer and analyst for Wallet Hub, and Kimberly Corbin, Chief Administrative and Financial Officer for the Greater Washington Urban League. Thank you both so much for joining this conversation. It is so important. I want to start with just a few fast facts from the study. Obviously, Chip will take a deeper dive. But according to this study, DC has the highest wealth gap overall, with whites earning 64% more than blacks. African Americans in the district are nearly, take a deep breath for this, 263% more likely than their white counterparts to be unemployed. And black district residents have a poverty rate that's 374% higher than whites living in DC. Gosh, you would almost think, Chip, that this was a typo with these eye-popping numbers. What exactly did Wallet Hub do to measure the racial wealth gap across American cities?
Yeah, now if not typo, you would have thought it was a story from The Onion or someplace like that.
Yeah, how about that?
How bizarre these numbers are. But what we did is that, we used the white population as sort of the benchmark because nationwide, the United States is still about 2/3, maybe slightly, about 63, 64% white. So we used that as the benchmark. Now, speaking of benchmarks, now nationwide, non-Hispanic white Americans have a median household wealth, we're not just talking income, but just total wealth of about $250,000, 250,400, compared to 24,520 for black households and 48,720 for Hispanic households. So that that should tell you this is not it's dire in DC. This is a microcosm of a much larger issue in the United States. So what we did is that we analyzed all 50 states and Washington, D.C. across 21 key metrics, and they run the gamut. Median household income gap, employment rate, poverty gap, education gap. All of those, we to get kind of a comprehensive look, because usually if there's a gap in some socioeconomic metric, it's usually tied to something else. So we try to make it as comprehensive as possible.
So, and it certainly, I'm looking at the numbers with, of course, DC being at the, my goodness, at the top of the list, and just taking that deep dive, some of the summaries, comments, particularly as a black person who was born in DC, this really kind of hits home for me. But again, with that, when you look at that headline where it says that black people in the district are the most disadvantaged group, when you hear that, Kimberly, what comes to mind? What do you think?
I'm probably going to be a little different than most, because my response is going to be, what's changed?
Mm-hmm.
Chip, one of the studies that you cited dates back to 2013, right? That talks, and it was a deep dive on the disadvantage and the gap, right? The equity gap. It's no different. I don't care whether if you talk to the ecosystem builders like United Way or the Greater Washington Community Foundation, or you talk to the policy and the think tanks and the researchers like Urban Institute, right? They've been studying this and they've been tracking this for decades. It's the same. It may be getting worse in some respects, in some different in the district, but it's the same. The numbers still tell us that we have that racism is still a systemic issue. It's not an individual issue. It is built into our systems. And until we decide to have that uncomfortable conversation about how you get to the root cause and address the root cause and not the symptoms, it's going to be the same no matter what year you study.
You know, it's interesting, Kim, when you talk about that. I remember way back in 1987, at a press conference when I was a young reporter for WHUR, my first news job. And there was a press conference at the National Press Club, and it was the annual State of Black America delivered by the National Urban League.
Yeah.
And as you said, nothing seems to have changed. The only real difference is that we could just change the number from 1987 to 2026.
Mm-hmm.
The issues are the same. But with that said, what is the thing that stood out in this study for you, Kim?
It's the generational piece that Chip pointed out. And it was a little bit of an aha, because it explains why it's so difficult, and it's multi-generational poverty, right? Because if the wealth is not there for one generation, it's not there for the next generations after that. Wealth builds on itself, right? We build wealth one generation after another. So if one generation never gets there, or their wealth is stolen, or their wealth is, we have, a great recession that destroys wealth, now we're starting all over. And we're starting from a lower amount to begin with, right? We started way behind.
Right. You're at a low bar. Yeah, you're starting out at a low bar. Well, Harold, one thing I wanted to mention to you, and you said growing up in Washington, D.C., and I didn't realize this till I started looking at the demographics, because you said as being from D.C., then, because I had always been, and it wasn't that long ago, where the ethnic population, D.C. was 70-80% minority. Mm-hmm. And I'm using that as a benchmark. And it's like, well, kind of well, Harold, you being a lifelong DC resident, and you, as you're well aware, and I grew up realizing this, that Washington DC, the ethnic breakdown as far as minorities, it was 70, upwards of 80% Black, less than a generation ago. And I was using that as sort of my benchmark when I'm looking at these. But I went back and looked at the breakdowns again, and it's 40% Black, 38%, and then maybe 10 to 12% Hispanic. So adjusting for that for these kind of demographics, it suggests to me that now we're all aware of white flight, which has gone on in major cities all across. I'm thinking now it's becoming, in DC, it's becoming more of a wealth flight, because a lot of well-to-do African Americans are now leaving the city and moving into the suburbs. So, and I think that's probably what's keeping a lot of these numbers down.
Well, let me dovetail on that. Two things. First of all, according to this study, Black people in DC are nearly 61% less likely to have a bachelor's degree than white people. Let's just talk about the education piece. And when you talk about generations, I can speak about my own experience, where, being born in DC, but raised in the Maryland suburbs. both of my parents were the first generations in their family to have college educations. But both of them had advanced degrees, which allowed them to pursue professional careers, and of course their parents moving from parts of the South like Southern Maryland and the Deep South, South Carolina. We can go on with my own family history, but it is not unique. But once they educated themselves, participated in very lucrative careers, and their friends were also part of that. And of course, the wonderful me was born, and my sister, and the like. Um, I would say that we are outside, I think, of these numbers. But I get my question though, Kim, is, and this is the hard part. Why is this still happening? Racism is one aspect, but now there is so much information out there that we've been talking about on this program, for example, that could help not necessarily make a Black family wealthy, but help them come out of poverty.
Can I do two things with this?
Do all you
One
want.
is one is to just understand that as first of all, we started from way behind in the first place. The
Hmm.
second thing, and then we look at the history of wealth, right? Wealth in the past was stolen. We built wealth way back in the day. We had generational wealth that was building. It was stolen. It was bombed. Then we get to, seasons like the Great Recession where it became destroyed. We had so many folks that had homes that, had wealth building, and then so many of us lost our incomes for multiple years, right? For a long period. That destroyed a lot of wealth, and the Black community has not come back fully from that, right? And then COVID hit after that, making it even that much worse. And again, in each of those situations, it impacted the Black community more than anybody else. And then we have the wealth redistribution that happens. We have communities in the district that suffered from disinvestment. And then when the investment came and all of these wonderful tax programs came, it didn't benefit the longtime residents of those communities. It got distributed to other folks, and we got pushed out. We got pushed out of brownstones that are now going for millions of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't benefit, even though we paid and repaid for that brownstone over and over again. So first of all, we need to understand that no matter what we've done, there's been theft, there's been destruction, there's been redistribution of Black wealth through different means. But the other price for me is that it's not just about what other people are doing to prevent us from having wealth. It's the narrative change that has to happen, and it's twofold. We have to change how people feel about us, but we also have to change how we feel about ourselves. We have to go through this cognitive reframing and everybody needs to know, whoever you are Black and you are worthy to be wealthy. And so until we can deal with the narrative change, along with the systems change, and along with going back to our roots, and that is, wealth is a collective exercise. It is not an individual exercise. And so I could keep going on, but we have to understand the history of every time we get to a point of building wealth, something happens to steal it, to destroy, to redistribute it. And on the other hand, the narrative is that we aren't worthy, we shouldn't. And we've got to hit both of those.
I need to take a break, but I want to hear what Chip has to say about that. And I do also want to drill down a little bit more about what you were talking about, Kim, regarding how we feel about ourselves, because there is black wealth in DC as there is in this nation. And I'm sure you have some thoughts about what the wealthy black communities are doing to be outside of the numbers of this report. So please stay with us. We're going to take a break, but don't forget you can hear this and every edition of the Daily Drum Insight segment via podcast on WHUR.com. The original Quiet Storm with Raheem Devon is coming up next on WHUR-FM. This conversation continues on Sirius XM channel 141 in just a few seconds. Welcome back to the Daily Drum on Sirius XM channel 141. We continue our conversation about a new Wallet Hub study that says the wealth gap between black and white households is shockingly wide, the widest in the District of Columbia. My guests are Chip Lupo, writer and analyst for Wallet Hub, and Kimberly Corbin, Chief Administrative and Financial Officer for the Greater Washington Urban League. Chip, I wanted to get your thoughts about what Kim was sharing with us before the break about what others outside of the black community think of them, and also what they think about themselves. So I'm definitely asking a white guy about black people. So we'll have to see how you do with that question.
Well, first let's address the home ownership issue.
Okay.
That is actually, now there's still a long way to go, but now our data indicates that Washington, D.C. has the lowest home ownership rate gap, 27, almost 28%. Still a ways to go, but it does suggest that at least somewhere in the D.C. infrastructure, there's an effort to sort of promote and home ownership among black residents in Washington, D.C. But again, like she was saying, factors kind of erode that. I look at it though now, if Washington, D.C. is able to make strides in housing, it seems to me that you should kind of flip that. You should emphasis should be more on income first. Because yes, it's great if you have a house, but if you don't have the education, it's your house. So it seems to me that you kind of should have flipped the script. You should have started, and again, it's not easy, like you mentioned before, starting at ground zero. When it comes to the poverty, now this is key because you have to start first with the income. I would argue you would start with the education. Now I grew up in North Carolina, South Carolina, and lived in a lot of largely communities. So one thing for Harold is that the black residents in the towns I grew up with were sticklers for education because they had parents or even grandparents where it was illegal for them to be educated.
Mm-hmm.
They come out of this, so there was, and a lot of the black students that I went to worked harder, in a lot of cases achieved more because it was instilled to them to get that education, because that was an opportunity that their parents or even their grandparents were denied. So you start with the education, and education is not just about reading, writing, arithmetic. It is about addressing the cultural differences. And again, among the black community, whether it's, again, raising self-esteem and making black Americans truly believe that you have this privilege in front of you and you are entitled just as much as anyone else. So you start with the education. Now, whether you choose to go from high school and learn a trade or go on to college and to professional school, the education is the bedrock. For education, it's like if you're learning to play a sport or play a musical instrument. It starts with the fundamentals, and education is the fundamental. You build on that, you generate an income, you achieve the American dream by owning a house. You're able to maintain that wealth and that income and be able to not lose your house for whatever reasons.
You agree with what he's saying, Kim?
Yeah, again, I think those are all tools that we can use and that are, that's the dream. You go and you get you get educated and you get your advanced education, get more opportunities to earn income, and then you learn how to manage that and invest that, and you build wealth. Only we ain't in the same boat.
And so explain that because, as I said, um, you work in the DMV. You have, like I have, been exposed to eye-popping wealth, even in the Black community. We know wealthy Black people.
We do.
Okay, and I'm talking about more than one or two. So, what is it that you believe that collective of wealthy Black people have done to put them outside of the numbers of this study?
It's going to be on an individual basis. Because, if I look at the folks that are in private equity, very few of us got into private equity, but those who did get into private equity and did well and learn how to do and do M&A well, they're very wealthy. They picked the right industry, right? They made sure that they had sponsors, right, for that. So there's all kinds of, if you sit and talk to the wealthy, you can see, that they had a specific strategy for it. But that still doesn't make, I could have followed the same path and I still might not have ended up with the same amount of wealth, right? So it's not a foregone conclusion just because you go get an education that you're going to actually have the same amount of opportunity to build wealth. That's not true. And it's not, and so and you're not going to get paid the same, right? Black women, executive women get paid a heck of a lot less, and we have a hell of a lot more. Oh, sorry. We have a lot more risk of losing a job than anybody else, right? And so when we get to those executive levels, so those are tools, those are essentials, but they don't yield the same return for us that they yield for other people. And only a select few of folks are able to actually get through that hole. And you will have to, that little tiny hole, and you'll have to ask them how they did it.
Well, that's what I was going to say, because if the information is there, and I'm talking about in this modern era, that we have seen, Black families and and individuals amass eye-popping wealth, and so is it that they're not teaching others? Is it that those who are um, in poverty, because some could argue that Google is the great equalizer. You ask it and it will tell you. But is it that you don't know what the question is, or where is, or is it that they're not listening, or they're not making the right choices?
It's a complex question. I mean, you look at a Robert Smith who came from humble beginnings and look at where he's at, right? But you look at other folks who took some of the same paths and they're not there. I mean, recently I went to my reunion at Harvard Business School, or the alumni, African American Alumni Association 50th anniversary, and in the room, half of the folks were like billionaires, and the other half of us were still living check to check. What accounts for that difference? Because we all got the same education. We all had, many of us had, the same level of will and skill and things like that. But we make choices. People make choices, and the industries that they pursue matter, right? And So you really have to study it. I think David Thomas, Dr. David Thomas, who was also president after leaving Morehouse. I mean, after leaving Harvard, went over to Morehouse, and he did a lot of studies on who gets through the net and who doesn't get through the net. Right?
Mm.
There is a net, and most people don't get through it. Right? Some do. But it's I think it's less of what we do and more of what the system allows to have happen.
Mm. You know, one of the things, Chip, that I wanted to ask about is we've been talking obviously about the District of Columbia proper, but how does that racial wealth gap in DC compare to neighboring states like Virginia, like Maryland?
Okay, give me a second to pull up. Now, Maryland is unique. Now, Maryland is 11th. Now, out of 51, now this isn't the AP top 25. You don't want to be number one on this list. So,
Right.
Maryland at number 11. Wow, yeah, the poverty rate is 100% for Black folks in Maryland. Maryland is kind of unique because you have Baltimore with its inner city, but you also have places like Columbia, Maryland, which is the quintessential American suburb. It seems that every study that we do that has positive, whether it's getting a job, places to live, safest, it seems that Columbia, Maryland always seems to come out on top. So you have like these huge gaps right there in your own backyard. Now, Columbia being between Washington, D.C. and Maryland, I just find that just fascinating that this little suburb is basically the picture of the American dream, more or less, but it's still in a state where it's 100% of the Black people are at the most disadvantaged.
Mm. Mm.
And Harold, can I just say this? 'Cause, I think one of the other things that we might need to spend more time on and study more, and that is the collectivism, right?
What do you
Wealth,
mean by that?
wealth is not an individual thing. Real wealth does not happen because an individual just made it. Even the richest Black folks didn't make it on their own, right? They had help. They had a community backing. They had friends backing. And so wealth building requires there to be a collective body to support you. And that, one of the things that in the search that Chip also put in the article, which dates back to 2013, and that is, Black folks don't have a bunch of rich people in their family to help them when they want to start a new business.
Mm-hmm.
New startups. Black folks don't have our community, doesn't have, my family didn't have money to give me to buy a house. My family didn't have money for me to pay for college education. I had to come out with debt, right? So, we have to learn. And again, you ask the question, what are people doing or not doing? And I think one of the things we need to do more of, and this is no judgment on anybody, and that is we need to pull our nickels together, because we had already shown that we could do that. Black Wall Street and all our other communities back in the day, everybody benefited from everybody's brilliance. And everybody helped everybody get ahead. Now we're so fragmented. We're so individualized. It's such an individual thing now. We have to get back to community. We have to get back to building. And what my grandmother or grandfather said, we got to circle the wagons around our own selves.
Well, and I think you make an excellent point. But during the time of Black Wall Street, others were circling a wagon around us. So Black people had no choices. If they were lucky enough, for example, descended from the talented 10th, and able to go to college, they went to an HBCU. Number one, if they had the opportunity uh, to do that. They had to keep those dollars within the Black community because venturing outside of the Black community was risky at best and a death sentence at worst. But
Mm-hmm.
now you can go, you don't have to go to a Howard University. You can
Mm-hmm.
go to a Harvard
Mm-hmm.
if you are connected or smart enough or what have you. Those and so it for some communities that may be a bit of a hard sell, which maybe this is why that's one of the contributing factors, which indeed makes your point. I do want to talk about something that that happened this week, which is I think fascinating in and of itself, where President Trump is pitching his affordability economy with these new Trump accounts, giving $1,000 to every household that has a newborn and investing it for 18 years. So, Chip, I did the math. I know I didn't do the math. Google did the math, but at assuming that you had $1,000 invested for the next 18 years, you would come out with about $5,600 in 18 years. On one hand, $5,600 is not a lot of money in investment. On the other hand, like my mother would say, that's more than what you had. 18 years ago, such a thing you would have based on the stock market $1,000. You would have had less than $2,000. It is that I don't know. What do you think about the idea, no matter whose name is on the account, about that, that kind of getting $1,000 and investing it for the next 18 years? I mean, that's not going to help you out of poverty.
Yeah, it's just a kind of a catch-22. Now, I understand the intent here, but you want to avoid these situations to where it becomes a dependency issue, because some people argue, how is this any different than these universal basic incomes that other politicians are pitching? Now, the other drawback is that, or do we assume that you're going to invest that $1,000 for the next 18 years? So, I mean, you're painting with some broad brushes. I like the idea of at least some kind of a kickstart, but again, I think we need to kind of look at the long-term effects of that also.
And this is obviously based on $1,000 per child. Just a headline, because I'm sure there are very few people who know this. It costs more than $1,000 to raise a child. Children are expensive. Kimberly, so your thoughts
I
about
say,
that?
save your $1,000 and give me my reparations. Give me back the land you stole. Make it so that bring back the equitable pay. Your $1,000 means nothing, and that to me is an insult to this situation. I mean, you engaged in family separation, and now you want to give $1,000. You've engaged in removing protections from racism that continue to lead to death and destruction. But you want to give me $1,000 to have a baby?
Yeah,
kind of disgusting.
Yeah. I did want to talk about another housing related thing, and for example, we can look at DC's LaDroit Park, which is a community just south of of Howard University, with beautiful Victorian homes, more than many of them more than 100 years old, historically a Black community. Not so much now because of gentrification. And when he was alive, I was having this conversation with Maryland Congressman Elijah Cummings about some of the same kinds of things that were happening in Baltimore, where
Mhm.
he represented. He was saying the same kind of things that were happening in LaJoy Park, where some of the owners of those homes, as they passed away, their children, for whatever reason, did not want them, did not keep them. Many of them had moved to the suburbs for many reasons, one of which is that they want new. Nobody wants an old house. But realizing that some of those homes are now worth more than $1 million each, and that as a result of gentrification and those and others who could come in and revamp those houses and bring them back to their original splendor with modern upgrades. I think this is another one of those wealth building things, Kim, that Black families have missed out on.
Yeah. But it's it's complex.
Mm-hmm.
Recently, the Greater Washington Urban League has decided to change its process or to be additive to its home buyer process. We realize that the industry is extremely fragmented and the process is an intimidating mountain of steps. And each step along the way, there is systemic racism that causes the conversion rate to keep going further and further down. So by the time you get from I can't, I want to the I did, it's very narrow. We have decided that, if you study, if we really are after transformational impact, then we have to address why that conversion ratio gets to almost very small. And so we have to be agents that are antidotes to the racism. We have to remove the intimidation. So are designing a process which we are, for the lack of a better term, the team will come up with something, I'm sure something more spiffy, but home buyers agents. So if you're a home buyer, we want you to call us. We want to help you walk into the bank to make sure the bank doesn't discriminate against you when you apply for your loan. We want you to call us and we want to help you through the whole process for when you go look for a home, so that those old time covenants that said somebody can't sell to a Black person doesn't happen. We can show up as the Greater Washington Urban League with our expertise and our preferred vendors that we're going to use. We're going to show up when you go and put in an offer letter and make sure that you know how to put that offer letter in. We're going to show up with our inspectors and make sure that there are no hidden issues. We're going to show up when it's time to negotiate your contract. We're going to show up, but we are also going to show up after close. After close, we're going to show you that you have to do a specific deed in order to keep your house out of probate. We're going to show you what you need to do to, pass on your assets. And we're going to help you do that and bring our experts to it. So a big part of it is we have decided that we are going to be an antidote to the conversion ratio that looks like this. Mm-hmm. And we're going to remove the impediment of discrimination at each of those steps, where the system has something else, some other, hoop that somebody has to jump through.
Mm-hmm. I only have a few moments left, but Chip, I wanted to ask you, just based on your experience with this study and others, what do you believe it would realistically take to begin to close the racial wealth gap in DC?
Well, first of all, it starts at the top, and you need diversity among the policymakers. And I'm not just talking about Black, white, Hispanic. I'm talking about income-wise. I mean, you want someone representing you who has been where you currently are, and someone who's been in your shoes. So it starts there. Once you create sort of a coalition of both economic, racial, educational diversity, once you start there and you have all of these collective heads at the table, I think at some point you'll start to see better results. Again, it's not going to happen overnight, but it's a start.
Mm. And Kim, you said something earlier, and I wanted to make sure I touched on it, where you were talking about how Black people feel about themselves and how that can contribute to closing the racial wealth gap. Drill down on that real quick for me, please.
Sure. If you have sustained racial trauma for centuries and you've been told that you're less than, you've been told that you're not worthy, eventually at some, that is embedded in how we respond, our stress responses, our responses to opportunities, it all, we're going to question, oh, should we go for that? Right. I'm not doing it justice right now, but basically our relationship with money and is embedded, or the impact that trauma, racial trauma has had on us is embedded in our relationship with money, and in a relationship in our thoughts about whether or not we feel worthy, and whether or not we even have an want to try. That hope and that drive is killed, every time the law is used against us, weaponized against us. Policies are weaponized against us. Every time we try and they kick us and we get right and we get right back up. So we have to stop for a second and remember that we are brilliant people, and that we wouldn't even be here if we weren't brilliant people, because we weren't made to, the system wasn't set up for us to survive, let alone thrive. So if I get to a young person, or to any person, and I tell them that you are worthy, you are brilliant, and you need to shed that shame and you need to shed that baggage, because that's how somebody else feels about you, that's not who you really are. And when you begin to free somebody up to really have that self-esteem and to believe in themselves, they will do for themselves. Their level of drive, their level of commitment will take them to their full brilliance, will take them to the wealth that they're capable of doing. But we have been told so many times by so many people that we are not worthy, that we're not, that we're not smart enough, and yet we are, because we keep overcoming. Every single time somebody raises the bar, we will overcome, but it's hard. So we have to be there for each other psychologically. We have to get people psychologically to believe they can, because the system keeps telling them that they can't.
I think that's a good place to end this conversation, but certainly this will not be the last conversation about this issue. Kimberly Corbin with the Greater Washington Urban League and Chip Lupo with Wallet Hub. Thank you both so much. I appreciate your time.
Always a pleasure, Harold. Thank you so much.
Sure thing. That is the Daily Drum for this Thursday, January 29th, 2026. I'm Harold Fisher. Good night.